Hi, everybody. Welcome to a sunny, windy day in Muizenberg, Cape Town. They're expecting, very strong winds this weekend. Only really brave enough for the big surfers, not myself. Today, we're going to be doing something different. I have the honor of having invited Patricia Fine to talk to us about whatever she wants to. She definitely has lived an interesting life, political life. She was the mayor. I think you said to me that you were the 13th Jewish mayor of Cape Town. I think if I read that correctly in one of the emails. So thank you for letting me know that about you. Today is the fourth part of the Recollection series where we remember past and present. We also remember Jewish bravery, community service, achievements, etc., etc. And I think that for sure, I'm not going to be able to do justice, but thankfully, Patricia, you will, of how you devoted your life to community service. And when you talk about community, I mean, when you are a mayor of a city, that is a very big community that you have taken on. So I look forward to hear what you have to say. The way that this will work is Patricia will start off by speaking. I'll make her the spotlight. And then after that, we will go into questions and answers or any comments at the end. Please feel free during this talk to chat, to put whatever questions or comments that you want. I'm going to mute everybody. Patricia, you included. So just unmute yourself. I'm just muting everybody just so that there is no background noise. And so Patricia, there we go. You have unmuted yourself. And I'm just going to make you spotlight and I'll tell you when that happens. Go for it. Thank you very much, Patricia.
Hello, everybody, from a fairly windy Hermanus afternoon. As many of you know, I grew up and spent my childhood into teenage years in two hotels in Muizenberg. First, the Rio Grande, which belonged to my uncle Colin Hirschhorn, where I lived until I was 10 with my wonderful cousin Clive, who hopefully is listening to us from the UK. And when the Hirschhorns returned to Johannesburg, I then had my parents I found out that my parents had signed a lease on the Atlantic Hotel on the main road opposite Muizenberg Station. So from the age of about 11, that was my next home. In and out, in the season, we rented somewhere, usually in Royal Road. And then in the winter, we lived in a hotel, which by the time I got to high school was actually just behind. The high school was really behind the hotel. So having grown up in that environment of hospitality, and I was roped in because it was a family business from a very young age, doing everything that was needed in the hotel, from handing out linen to helping my father pour drinks in the bar, to more particularly operating the switchboard. And for those of you old enough, you'll remember those switchboards that had cords that you stuck in, and of course the PA system where I had to announce anybody who had a telephone call way before cell phone. So I on reflection, feel sure that this early influence in my life of the hospitality business, interacting with visitors, had a very strong influence in the way that I then proceeded with my life and the interaction I was able to do with other people, diverse across the board. And I really like people. So as I grew older and I was working, my job, and I'm sure that you're all curious as to how I became a city councillor, which of course was the precursor to becoming mayor. I was working as the marketing manager for Fisher Price South Africa. And they belonged to a group I'd never heard of before called the Cape Chamber of Commerce. Cape Chamber had sponsored a toy fair that I had taken a stand at. And my stand had won the prize for the best stand. And I was presented with a certificate by the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce and its president at the time. And I said, what is this place? What do you do? And they explained to me that they were a business organization representing businesses, that they had 3 or 4 committees, and that any member was very welcome to come to the committee. So the committee sounded interesting. There was economics, there was finance, and there was community affairs. So I started to attend these monthly meetings and found the community affairs the most intriguing and riveting. And it was like a mini city council. They took city issues, they would examine them, discuss them, see how they affected business, and had a very close relationship with officials from the city. I participated with great interest and was quite critical of the fact that there were mostly old people on this committee, people who'd been there for years. When I say old, I'm talking from a perspective now of age, but I mean people who did not change their minds. The kinds of comments you'd come against if somebody made a suggestion, usually a younger person. No, we've tried that, it didn't work. I'm sure you've all heard that before. So at the next AGM of the Chamber of Commerce, I and another woman stood for election to the executive committee, and we got on. We were the first women in 184 years. It was the same year that Philip Kravitz, known to many of you, was the youngest president to be elected ever to the chamber. He was 32 or 34, somewhere around there. Philip was a fantastic president, and he had a very, very successful year. It was during this time that I met Louis Kramer, and he had been a city councillor at that stage for about 10 years. Knowing my interest in civic affairs, he encouraged me to stand for the city council. And there were going to be elections a year ahead, and then he started to discuss with me which ward I should contest. And he insisted that the only ward I should consider should be the CBD and the lower gardens, which was called Ward 6. In those days, there were 17 wards in the city of Cape Town. Each ward had 2 councillors representing them. The voters were ratepayers and property owners. Well, property owners were ratepayers, but they were both residential and property owners. A little bit different today. The incumbents of Ward 6, the CBD, at the time were Leon Markovitz and David Bloomberg. And Louis predicted, quite rightly, that David Bloomberg would resign as soon as he had a competitor or had to fight an election, because he had never fought an election in his life. Something that David admitted to in exactly those words when he came back to South Africa and spoke at the Garden Show during their 70th anniversary year. So I put my name down for that ward, and Leon Markovitz found a running mate. I'm not sure why, but he had a running mate who was another very powerful businessman in Cape Town who had a printing press. And they had an unlimited budget for this election. They were printing 4-color flyers and 4-color posters and sending out mailing after mailing. And I had a budget of a mere 30,000 Rand, which was the total sum of all my savings. So my campaign was very modest compared to theirs. But I knocked on doors and I pavement pounded, something that they didn't bother to do. I'd also set up a ratepayers association in the lower gardens, which they'd never had before. So I had met many of the people who lived there. I knew what their issues were, and I was able to identify who the voters were. And the sweetest moment of my whole life to date was when I stood next to Leon Markovitz watching the counting of the votes. I couldn't follow it as fast as he could because they were counting for 3 people, but only 2 were going to, the 2 with the most votes were going to make it. And before they'd finished, Leon turned to me, shook my hand, and said, "I concede, congratulations." My late husband, Louis Craner, was a former mayor and very experienced councillor for many years. He had been my champion throughout. He encouraged me to become a councillor. He guided me through the election. And then after 5 years, he said to me, "It's time you ran for mayor." City tradition at that time, pre-transition, was that the term of office was 2 years as deputy mayor. And then, although an election took place, the deputy was always elected to mayor for another 2-year term. So you had 2 years training and then you took office. I put my name in the hat for deputy mayor at the next election. I was opposed by the very popular Patricia, who I'm sure many of you who lived in Sea Point will remember, and I won. So it's now the 31st of August, 1993. Clive Keegan, the current deputy mayor, succeeds Frank van der Velde and becomes mayor. And with the election around the corner in April of 94 and a change of government, it looks like I'm never going to become the mayor. The fact that I became mayor was extraordinary in the literal sense of the word. Prior to and in the run-up to April 94, politics had started to creep into the city council. Both the DP, which is now the DA, and the MP had started caucuses. And while many councillors remained independent, the caucuses, particularly the DP caucus, had the majority and was the most powerful. And they started to flex their muscles over issues that were clearly vote catching. There'd been a recent rather large rate hike, and they took advantage of using this as an issue to buy votes, if you like. And someone had to take the fall over this, as the press called it, a race debacle. So the caucus forced the whole executive committee to resign. And my late husband, Louis Craner, was the chairman of the executive committee at the time. So he and all the office bearers were forced into resignation. The position now vacant, Clive Keegan decided that it was much more powerful to be the chairman of the executive committee than the mayor. And at the next council meeting in October, at the end of October, he resigned as mayor, offered himself for election as chairman of the executive committee, and he has one other person opposing him. He wins the election by 3 votes, and I'm then unanimously elected mayor after 58 days. I called it a palace coup, so I became the mayor at the expense of my husband. The truth is that Louis was in failing health. He had kidney failure and was on dialysis every 4 hours. The role of chairman was far too demanding for him by then, and not something he would voluntarily have conceded. The lead in the Cape Times, the day after the council meeting, described the drama of what had happened and ended with congratulations to me, saying, "She occupies the chair of Van Riebeck at a most difficult time in Cape Town's affairs. Perhaps her gentler touch will help to soothe the savage ratepayers' breath and reconcile the polarized councillors in spite of the caucus that divides them." Being elected mayor of Cape Town was an unbelievable privilege and honor. I was the 300th mayor in the city, the first being Gilly Johannes de Korte in 1867. The second woman in the position in 3 decades, Joyce Newton Thompson had been the first in 1959. And as Ryan's already said, the 13th Jewish mayor. And of course, the last, I want to say white mayor, but Helen scuppered that accolade. And but I was the last of the old tradition. So highlights. I promised and I meant to be mayor for everyone. From the edge of the Cape Flats to the Table Mountain Range, I had an open door policy. Everyone and anyone who wanted an appointment got one, and I welcomed people in exactly the same way. And always with tea and council scones. Those scones were the best ever. I still think about them. One day, after I'd been in office a couple of months, I got a call from the PAC asking for a meeting. Pan-Africanist Congress was founded by Robert Sobukwe. They're no longer a party, but they've been very active during apartheid. A radical organization led then by a very intelligent man, Clarence Mokwetu. Of all things, they wanted me to help with exposure and opportunity to present their manifesto and what they stood for. They felt that people had not been apprised sufficiently and they didn't know how. And they obviously didn't have a budget. So I arranged for them to do a presentation to the Chamber of Commerce. And then, just before the election, I got another call from them, offering me the #1 position on their party list if I would agree to join the party. Well, I declined with thanks. But my next task after the new parliament was to try in whatever way we could as a city to make these 400 new parliamentarians feel at home. The ANC had an over 60% majority of that 400. And many of those people had never been outside their village, let alone traveled on an airplane or been to a big city. And suddenly they were coming to this city, many of them with families, having to find homes, settle in, get their children into school, and all doing this in a strange city. So I formulated a very intense campaign, which took 3 months. It was planned over 3 months in order to actually make sure that we included everyone. But what I did was I divided my theme into the portfolio committee. And I had a list of who's on the portfolio committee. So they were the basis of the invitation. And I had receptions for each of those committees, inviting everyone from the committee and their partners, and then inviting Cape Townians of like mind. So if it was the Department of Health, the Minister for Health, I would invite people from hospitals, doctors, executive directors, nurses, and anyone in the health field. Similarly with education, police, justice, and so on. I had cocktail receptions for the rank and file, and then I had dinners for the ministers, the directors general, and the top level officials. Again, inviting one or two ministers from different, obviously different departments, and with local people in attendance. And those dinners could accommodate, I could have up to 40 people in my dining room, or invariably, because most of the time, I'm sad to say, people didn't respond. And I would end up maybe with 18 people, 20 people in that vicinity. At the very last dinner, at the end of this rather intense campaign, I had expected Winnie Mandela. It was the third time she'd been invited. The first two times, she hadn't bothered to respond at all. The third time, surprisingly, her office had accepted the invitation. So that morning, David Weitzman, who was my aide and known to many on this call, he'd been in my class at school, at high school, and his mother had been my standard 3 teacher at Musenberg. David was a fantastic aide, that as an aside. He was absolutely marvelous. He'd run the mayor's office for years, and he knew everything there was to know. David came into my office and said, Mrs. Mandela's office had said she was coming, but didn't say if it was 1 or 2 people. What shall I do? And I said, set for 2. And that was that. My guests were invited at 7:30 or 8. We'd meet at 7:30 in my parlor where we'd have drinks served, and we'd go into the dining room at 8 o'clock. At 5 to 8, she hadn't arrived yet. And I was getting rather embarrassed. And I said to my guests, I'm terribly sorry for keeping you waiting, but we're waiting for Mrs. Mandela. At which point the deputy speaker, who was the most senior person there that evening, Badra Ramshad, said, I don't think she's in town. She wasn't in the house today. So I said, thank you for that. We'll go into this. Well, she didn't turn. A couple of weeks later, I was invited to the opening of the sculpture, The Ice Cream Cone, by Gavin Young, which was on where Nobel Square is now. It's been moved to another part of the waterfront. And the opening was being done by the Minister of Arts and Culture, Ben Ngubane. I arrived and he came to greet me, and we were just chatting, when he said, oh, the deputy ministers arrived. Please come with me to greet her. It was Winnie Mandela. So we walked to greet her. She greeted us very warmly, and I took a deep breath and I said, and you owe me an apology. And I proceeded to tell her that she'd been invited 3 times, what had happened. And she did not bat an eyelid. Her smile did not move. She turned to her shoulder-length, blonde, blue-eyed secretary and said, I've got a new secretary. I have no idea what that meant, whether it was his fault or it was the previous one's fault. So I took another deep breath and I said, you know, Mrs. Mandela, we are now living in an international world. And if you want to operate, you have to do so on international rules. And she took her hand with this wonderful smile out of this beautiful face, stroked my arm and said, I'll make it up to you. And I realized how people had fallen into her spell. She was absolutely charming. In years later, when I was visiting my mother and I spent quite a lot of time in Johannesburg, I bumped into her every day in Pilani shopping mall on many occasions. And she was always absolutely friendly and charming, and would discuss with me Cape Town and how it was such a shame what was happening in Cape Town and how much she loved it. So I'm not sure what the time is now, Ryan. How am I doing?
You're doing great. If you wanted to speak for a few more minutes, go for it. Otherwise, we can go to questions, whatever you prefer.
Highlights that I'd like to touch on, but the one that I think is important to remind everybody about was Cape Town winning the right to host the summer games. Not to host it, of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. Cape Town winning the right to bid for the summer games of 2004. We won the bid, of course, from Johannesburg and Durban. And that was a highlight for the city. And then I became much more involved in the bid process, because when I became mayor, I became the chairman of the Olympic Bid Trust, which had to look after the funds, the sponsorship, and the budget, which I have to share with you was largely and almost entirely funded by Raymond Ackerman. I'm not sure he'd like me to say that, but I think it is common knowledge. He and Nonde Balfour were co-chairs of the Olympic Bid Committee, and I just chaired the trust, which met every couple of months. But that was a very important, it was a very important milestone in the history of Cape Town, because had we not done that, and there was a lot of criticism and skepticism about what it would cost the city, and it did cost the city. Unfortunately, we got a badly placed stadium, a most beautiful stadium, but in my opinion and many others, it's rather badly placed. It was insisted on that for political reasons. And we also got a lot of infrastructure. So, I think on balance, it was a great thing. But with that came a lot of tasks. And one of the people I met was the Olympic representative, the US Olympic representative, who was Dr. Leroy Walker. And more about him if I've got time. Because what I want to mention now is that one of the events that I had to participate in, I was publicly challenged by Nonde to join him in running the 5-kilometer race, not race, but it was a run as part of the sponsorship for the bid and to publicize the bid. At that stage, Louis was really failing, and he had been taken off dialysis 2 weeks prior to this, and it was really a matter of time. I was very reluctant to leave him unnecessarily. My mother had flown down from Johannesburg, and she was staying at our home, and really being with him all of the time, I used to try to be there as much as I could. And so I was, having been challenged publicly, I had to go. And I was there for the start. I ran a couple of meters and I left as I came home. And Louis died at 7 a.m. the next morning. That evening in the Argus, they put the notice that they had a photograph of me starting the race and starting the run. And right next to it, adjacent, they had the article about Louis having died. And I thought it was a most insensitive thing to do. So that was a low light. After I sat Shiva, the very first duty that I had back in the city was the welcoming the President of France, Francois Mitterrand, at Cape Town Airport at 7 a.m. I arrived there before, went to the VIP lounge, and while I, in advance also, after I'd been there a few minutes, President Mandela arrived, and as he walked in, he saw me across the room. He strode across the room, very tall man, took my hand, looked me in my eyes, as he was his wont when he talked to you. He looked you straight into your eyes, as if no one else was in the room. And he said, "We're so sorry to hear of your loss." He was an extraordinary, wonderful, thoughtful man, and missed by everybody. So then began a succession of heads of state visiting the city, the country, and Cape Town in particular. The Parliament was here. And my schedule was unbelievably busy. Lots of highlights from there, but that's for another time. I would love to go back to the story of what Leroy Walker organized for me in America, but happy to do that on another occasion. And I think now you might want to take questions.
Great. Well, first of all, Patricia, thank you so much. I think some people might feel a little bit intimidated in the sense of you're talking at such a level that most people don't get to experience in life. I loved every minute. And as you said, you could talk for 3 hours, and we don't have 3 hours, but there's definitely more time if you want to go into some stories, because each one gets better than the next. I have some questions myself, just while I just provide a forum for people to ask questions. If anyone wants to write in the chat, please ask. Otherwise, just unmute yourself and say your name so I can put you in the spotlight. I was wondering, Patricia, a mayor of Cape Town, why you are living in Hermanus. And now I understand why, because you deserve some peace and rest and sanity after all the things that you've gone through over there. But I like to say I can imagine, but this one I have to say I cannot imagine. I'm just going to preface by saying this series, the Recollection series, Jewish bravery, check for both you and, am I right in saying your late husband was a mayor as well? I think I understood that. So wow, it was a couple, a leadership couple of note. Certainly achievement, that is for sure. One of the questions I was thinking in my mind is, was it harder to overcome you being a female or being Jewish in terms of your striving towards being a mayor? But I'm not going to ask that question. One question I have,
Brian, it's very easy. It was much harder overcoming being a female. I can assure everybody that had I been a male in that office, I would not have had nearly as much antagonism and the kind of attitude to doing stuff that I got. That was the hardest part.
Wow. Well, to me, I put you up there, and I mean this in the best way possible, because I don't want to be too political with the politician, but I put you up there with Golda Meir in the sense of
Oh,
achievement and things
no,
like that, because it sounds like you had a lot to deal with on an international level, including meeting the French president. One question, just a very easy question. You might find it a trivial question. Do you miss it?
no,
Okay,
no.
good. You've been there. Yeah,
There was a time for that. I've been there.
yeah,
I look back and I think, I don't know how I had the energy.
yeah.
I sometimes have 9 functions in a day for which
Wow.
I often to change clothing and speeches. I used to go over my speeches in the car and make notes and write it. In those days, thank goodness, cars in phones had been invented. It was a huge box about the size of my laptop now. And I used to answer my messages in the car because I never wanted to end a day where I had one message unanswered. And I didn't.
Wow. And I just have one last question before I'm going to open it up to the audience. The question I'm asking is, you grow up as a Jewish girl in Muizenberg, little Muizenberg, the village of Muizenberg that I now live in, which is still a little village. And one day you wake up and you're the mayor of the city. This is coming from a psychological interest that I have. When does it become real? Do you just wake up one day, do you stare yourself in the face and you laugh at yourself and you say, I'm the mayor? Do you even have time to process that that is going on because you're so busy? How does that work?
It isn't like that, Ryan, because having been a counselor for 5 years, you that milieu, you already understand what you do. And I have to tell you that Louis, who I said was my champion and who had such political mouth, was absolutely down to earth because he was a Boer Jood from Grabo. He grew up speaking Afrikaans. And that's why he'd been so comfortable in the previous regime, because he could speak Afrikaans to everyone. He was fluent. He used to remind me often that the position of mayor of Cape Town was a glorified PR. And it was, so in no way did we glorify the situation. It was a job. And you had a focus. The intention was to present Cape Town in the best possible way and to look after the ratepayers of the city in the best possible way, because that was always the focus. And I was so happy that in those days we were independent and we were there for the good of the vote, not for the party. And I wish local governments were run like that today.
Yeah, well, kol hakavod to you. Thank God you were the mayor, not me. I would have been focused on those delicious scones. But
I don't know how I stayed.
I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. Does anyone have a question? Does anyone or a comment or any memory of Patricia as mayor? Just unmute yourself. I'm going to say yes. I think Ben, I'm going to go to you first. I see that you put your hand up. So I'm going to just unmute yourself, Ben.
I have unmuted. Hello, Patricia. Nice to see you.
Hi, Ben.
I've got a question for you. You mentioned that in that election for council, Leon Markovits stood against you and that you beat him. How come he was mayor of Cape Town?
What happened is it was there were 3 candidates for 2 positions. So I beat his partner, his running mate.
Okay.
And that's what he meant when he said, I'll concede. You won. I beat Dennis Nick.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Leon still got a lot of votes. Leon and I got the two highest number.
Okay. Thank you.
Ben, I mean, I'm going to ask you, Ben, do you remember Patricia being the mayor?
Well, Patricia's actually a friend of mine, but at the time when she was the mayor, I didn't actually know her, but I'm very interested in Jewish history, and I know she was the 13th Jewish mayor of Cape Town. But at the time when she was mayor, I didn't know her.
Okay,
And
fair enough. Right.
living at Johannesburg, am I right?
No, I was in Cape Town,
Oh.
but you know, different. We didn't bump into each other.
Well, you should have come to Muizenberg, Ben. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Anyone else got a question?
I do remember Mervyn from the Muizenberg beach. He used to take the photographs.
Okay, great. Anyone else got a question, a comment? I mean, I've got lots of questions and comments, but I'm not seeing any in the chat. Anyone want to say anything? I know it's you've got to be careful with your words here because we've got politicians here, but I'm just playing. Okay, I'll ask another one just because I'm so interested. Patricia, I hope you don't mind. One question is, and this I see also in every company, religion, anything, I always think of who do the leaders go to for mentorship? Because I understand that, you know, counselors come to mayors or junior rabbis go to senior rabbis, but at a certain point, where else do you look for mentorship? And I would like to ask the question to you. I think you've already answered that question, that your late husband was certainly seemingly a mentor of yours. I think you mentioned he was your rock. Were there any other mentors that are worth mentioning that maybe people know or maybe people don't know, but they should know, of how to run a beautiful, impressive city like Cape Town through a democratic election time where I can't imagine what challenges were coming. Where did you go to for mentorship?
It's a very good question, Ryan. If it's a political issue, I would go to a respected, trusted politician. In one instance, when Leon Markovitz asked me to be his running mate, and I couldn't figure out why he wanted that. He wanted to avoid an election, I think. And I wasn't sure. My late husband had said, don't. But I wasn't satisfied with just Louis' answer. And I went to Colin Eglin. And I had a very good meeting with him. And he also said, don't. So I followed their advice. I had a chaplain, the rabbi from the Sea Point Shul, who we don't hear about anymore, Jack Steinhorn. But he never came near me the entire time of my, the only time I saw him ceremonially was when there was some ceremony that required us to be in full regalia, and you had to have everybody around, and Jack would appear. But so I didn't use or have the need, feel the need to use them. So I think you go to peers who have more experience than you have and who you respect. And I think that would apply to any discipline.
Yeah, that's why I'm addressing that question, because I think it applies to all different disciplines and scenarios. And sometimes it's hard to find those mentors. And I also am a little bit similar to you, as I try to find different people for different things, because no one, I believe, has it all. Last question that I have, which is, you've already mentioned some of your accomplishments, some of your highlights. I'm sure there were many, many more. You even mentioned some of your lowlights, which I think was quite brave. I was imagining that August front page, which split screen almost. I do think it was a bad taste as well, just from the way that you presented it. But it was brave of you to even mention it. Today's talk is the highlight. So it's interesting. You're a very real person, obviously, and I guess you have to be a mayor.
If you have highlights, you have to have lowlights. And
Sure.
there are many that I haven't even touched on.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. The question that I have for you, and this will be my last question, unless you say something which gets me thinking, because I've got so many, I could just go forever. And it's a leadership question, really. What, in your opinion, South Africa now, I think it's safe to say that there are some political problems going on at, if not the highest level, high levels. There's been levels of corruption, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Without asking you specifically, how you feel about the current political climate, I wanted to ask you more a values question of, what are the most important values that a person needs to have to be an administrative leader, like a mayor, potentially a premier, a president? I mean, you met some of these people. What are some of those values, like deep ingrained values, that are utterly crucial, in your opinion, to have, which we should be looking for in our leaders?
Ryan, I'm afraid, and I might have said this earlier in one form or another, that most leaders have other agendas.
Mm-hmm.
Almost by definition, a leader has an ego.
Yeah.
And usually the ego supersedes the intent or the job. Sadly, it's very rare to find people who are able to lead and keep focused on the original reason for wanting to be there. Like Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. He knew where he was going. And they did get sidetracked along the way. And it took a long time, but he persevered. And perhaps we could use that as an example. Leaders need to be true to their values, why they wanted to be there in the first place.
Great answer.
That's answered the question.
Yeah, great answer. I think that sometimes I think of a leader like King Solomon, who was known to be the wisest person when he was around, but he had a lot of issues. He had a lot of problems. And I think that you hit it on the head, being honest to what your original intention was. That's a very insightful value that you just gave. Thank you so much. Any last comments, anybody? I know that I've seen a lot of smiles, a lot of, just unmute yourself if you've got anything. Anyone want to say anything? Well, on that note, Patricia, I just want to say thank you so much. It was so interesting. And as you say, for another time, I do hope that there is another time, because I know that before we spoke, you said you're mostly going to be speaking about how did the process and the journey that led you to the mayor. And then you kind of gave us little tidbits of what it was being the mayor, including scones and other things. I hope that there is another time to learn that, especially, you lived through one of the most interesting times in modern history, I'd say of the world, but in particular of South Africa, in being a mayor, when the South Africa became a democratic country. I've got one comment here. Lovely, interesting, and informative talk. Thank you. So on that note, I think that on behalf of everyone, for sure, it was very, very interesting and definitely informative. And just enjoy your peace in Hermanus, but also always feel free to come and share the Luft with us here in Muizenberg and to your roots, because I myself, I didn't grow up here, but I'm very proud that somebody who, you know, I'm going to say this, just like you said about Raymond Ackerman, I'm going to say this about you, even though I don't know if you want everyone to hear, but Patricia sent me screenshots of something that she gave to the synagogue in 1995 to the late Frieda Shapiro and Harold Shapiro, and it was a letter back from the shul with Rabbi Rockman signed, thanking the mayor or the ex-mayor. So, you know, I know that your roots are there, and I know that you obviously didn't forget it when you walked this interesting journey of yours. So I'm proud of you. I'm putting you up there in the Golden Meir category. You can pick whatever you wish, but kol hakavod to you. Thank you everyone for being here, and the recording will be sent out ASAP, either tomorrow or Friday, for the world to see. Thank you again, Patricia. God bless you. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Stay well and safe, everyone.
Thank you, Alison.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, cheers. Cheers, Ben. Cheers, everyone.